The weight of their expectations had been a constant companion, a heavy, invisible backpack I'd carried since I was a boy. Now, at 48, it felt heavier than ever. My name is David, and my story isn't one of grand heroism or epic adventure. It's a story about family, a word that for me has always been a paradox, a source of both deep love and profound pain. It was a cold, crisp evening in late November, the kind of night where the air bites at your skin and the promise of snow hangs in the air. The city lights of downtown Boston twinkled below us, a blanket of stars scattered across the landscape from the window of my parents' luxurious penthouse. The view was breathtaking, but inside the air was thick with a familiar tension. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, his posture ramrod straight, a glass of single-malt scotch in his hand. At 75, he still commanded a presence that could silence a room. A self-made man, a titan in the real estate world, he built an empire from nothing, and he never let me forget it. My mother, Eleanor, elegant and impeccably dressed, sat opposite him, her smile a carefully constructed mask. She was the one who managed the family's social calendar, the one who orchestrated their public image. I was just another item on her list of things to manage, a project that never quite met her standards. My son, Leo, just 8 years old, sat beside me, his small hands carefully cutting a piece of steak. He was the only source of pure joy in these strained gatherings. His innocence, his boundless curiosity, was a light in the gloom. He was everything I wasn't to them, unburdened, full of a natural confidence they had tried and failed to instill in me. "So, David," my father said, his voice cutting through the polite silence, "I hear your company is struggling with the new market regulations. Is that true?" I looked up from my plate, the perfectly cooked steak suddenly unappetizing. My company, a small but successful software development firm, was facing some challenges, as any business does, but I was handling it. "We're adapting, Dad. It's just a temporary setback. We'll be fine." "Adapting is a nice way of saying you're failing, isn't it?" My mother chimed in, her tone a mix of condescension and feigned concern. "You've always had a difficult time with pressure, David. Remember how you couldn't handle that internship at my father's law firm? It's a good thing you found something simpler." The word simpler hung in the air, a barbed insult disguised as a casual observation. I felt a familiar heat rise in my cheeks. "Mom, that was 25 years ago. And my company is hardly simple. We employ 50 people, and we've been profitable for a decade." "Profitable for you, perhaps," my father scoffed, taking a long sip of his scotch. "But you'll never reach the kind of success I did. You lack the killer instinct, the drive. You're a glorified office clerk, David. A white-collar bum." The words hit me like a physical blow, but it was the next comment that truly shattered what little composure I had left. "Honestly, Robert," my mother said, her gaze sweeping over me with a look of disappointment, "he's just not cut from the same cloth as us. He's always been, well, he's just a disappointment. I don't know what we did wrong." She looked at Leo, then back at me, her face a mask of disappointment. "Look at him, Leo. Your father could have been someone. He could have been successful like your grandfather, but he chose to be a failure. He's just trash." The world seemed to stop. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversation from the other room, everything faded into a dull roar. The word trash echoed in my ears, bouncing off the pristine walls of their apartment. But it wasn't the word itself that broke me. It was the fact that she said it in front of my son. Leo's small face, which had been so animated just moments before, was now a portrait of confusion and hurt. He looked from his grandmother to me, his big brown eyes filled with a heartbreaking innocence. He didn't understand the depth of the insult, but he understood the coldness in his grandmother's voice, the dismissive look on his grandfather's face. He understood that something was wrong. I felt a surge of anger, a red-hot wave that started in my gut and surged through my veins. It was a familiar feeling, one I had suppressed my entire life, but this time it was different. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about my son, the person I loved more than anything in the world. They had crossed a line I never thought they would. They had taken their lifetime of disappointment in me and weaponized it against the one person I needed to protect. I placed my napkin on the table, the sound a small defiant protest in the otherwise silent room. "Leo," I said, my voice low and trembling, "we're leaving." My mother's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise breaking through her composed facade. My father just stared, his expression unreadable. "David, don't be dramatic," my mother said, her tone suddenly shifting to one of placation. "It was just a joke." "It wasn't a joke, Eleanor," I said, standing up. "It was cruel, and it was unforgivable." Leo slid off his chair, his small hand instinctively finding mine. I held it tight, the warmth of his fingers a grounding force. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The message was clear. I led Leo out of the dining room, past the stunned silence, and into the grand hallway. The gilded frames and antique furniture seemed to mock me, symbols of the wealth and status I had never been able to attain in their eyes. As we waited for the elevator, I heard my father's voice, a low rumble of anger. "What the hell was that, Eleanor? You've gone and pushed him too far. He's just being a baby, Robert. He'll get over it," she replied, her voice filled with a cold dismissal that was far more painful than any of her words. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. As we descended, I looked at Leo's face reflected in the polished metal doors. He looked so small, so confused. My heart ached for him. I had to protect him. I had to show him that his father was not trash, not a failure. I had to prove to him and to myself that I was worthy of his love and respect. In that moment, a quiet resolve solidified within me. The weight of their expectations, the backpack I had carried for so long, felt lighter because I had finally decided to drop it. I was done seeking their approval. I was done trying to live up to a standard that was impossible to meet. They had chosen to define me by their failures, and now I would define myself by my successes. I tightened my grip on Leo's hand as the elevator reached the lobby. The cold night air outside was a shock to my system, a bracing slap of reality. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like a breath of fresh air. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. I would never again allow them to diminish me, especially not in front of my son. I had endured their cruelty, their constant disappointment, and their belittling words. They had called me trash. Now I would make them pay. Not with money, not with revenge, but with the silent, powerful proof of my own self-worth. I was done being their victim. I was done being their project. I was going to be my own man, and I was going to show my son what true strength looked like. The drive back to our quiet suburban home felt like an eternity and a blur all at once. The car's heater hummed, but the silence inside was heavy, punctuated only by the soft rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. Leo was quiet, his head resting against the passenger window, the lights of Boston streaking past in a blur of red and white. I glanced at him from time to time, his small, somber face a stark contrast to his usual vibrant self. I didn't know how to start the conversation. How do you explain to an 8-year-old why his grandparents, the people who were supposed to love and cherish him, had so casually insulted his father? "Are you okay, buddy?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to me, his eyes wide and uncertain. "What did Grandma mean it when she said you were trash?" The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. I took a deep breath, pulling into a gas station to refuel. It was an excuse to stop, to buy myself a moment to find the right words. "She didn't mean it, not in the way you're thinking," I started, trying to choose my words carefully. "Sometimes, when people are unhappy with their own lives, they say mean things to others. It's not about the person they're talking about, it's about them." Leo's brow furrowed. "But why did she say it to you?" "Because your grandparents and we see things differently," I explained, turning off the engine. "They've always had a certain idea of what success looks like, and it's not the life I chose. And because of that, they get frustrated. But that doesn't make it okay for them to say those things. Not to me, and especially not in front of you." I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. "Your value and my value is not in how much money we have or what kind of job we do. It's in who we are. I'm a good father. I'm a good person. And that's all that matters. Do you understand?" He looked at me, a small, trusting smile slowly returning to his face. "You're not trash, Dad. You're the best dad." The simple, honest words were a balm to my wounded heart. The pain from the dinner, the years of quiet hurt, seemed to evaporate in the face of his pure, unconditional love. We bought some snacks from the station, a silly tradition we had, and the rest of the drive was filled with the easy chatter of a father and son, the tension of the evening replaced by a renewed closeness. Back home, after I tucked Leo into bed, I sat in the quiet living room, the city lights replaced by the soft glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. I pulled out my phone and found a contact I hadn't used in a while. Mark, my best friend since college. He was a successful architect, a family man, and the one person who had seen me through every stage of my turbulent relationship with my parents. "Hey, David." Mark's voice was warm and familiar. "It's late. Everything okay?" I let out a long sigh, the full weight of the evening crashing down on me. "No, man, it's not. I finally did it. I walked out on them." I recounted the events of the dinner, my voice cracking as I got to the part where my mother used the word trash in front of Leo. "Holy hell, David," Mark said, his voice low with a mix of shock and sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I know how much you've put up with, but that's a new low even for them." "I know," I said, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. I'm done, Mark. I'm finally done. I don't know what it looks like, but I can't do this anymore. Not to myself, and certainly not to Leo." "Good," Mark said, his voice firm. "It's about time. They've been treating you like a punchline for years, and you've let it happen because they're your parents. But now you have a son who looks up to you. You owe it to him to be a better example. You showed him tonight what it means to have self-respect, to stand up for yourself. That's a lesson no amount of money can buy." His words resonated with me, a simple truth I had been unable to see for so long. The old pattern of hurt and reconciliation was broken. I had chosen a new path. After I hung up with Mark, I knew I had one more call to make. I dialed my ex-wife, Sarah. We had a good, respectful co-parenting relationship, and she had always been a quiet observer of my family's dynamics. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft with concern. "David, is everything okay with Leo?" "He's fine," I reassured her. Something happened at dinner tonight. I need to tell you about it." I explained what had transpired, leaving out no detail. Sarah listened patiently, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry, David," she finally said. "I've seen how they are. I've heard the little comments, the way they dismiss you. It always broke my heart to see you take it. I think you did the right thing. You showed Leo that your dignity is more important than their approval. I don't know what comes next," I confessed. "I don't even know what our relationship with them looks like now." "It doesn't have to look like anything," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "You get to decide that. This isn't about them anymore, David. It's about you, and about Leo. It's about building a life and a legacy that you're proud of, without their shadow hanging over you. You're a good man, David. You're a wonderful father. Don't let their brokenness define you." Her words were a final piece of a puzzle I had been trying to solve for a lifetime. Her compassion, her insight, gave me the final push I needed. My parents' cruelty had, in a strange twist of fate, given me a gift, the freedom to be myself. As I hung up the phone, a quiet resolve settled over me. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was a scar, a reminder of what I had left behind. I went to my office and sat down at my desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating the room. I looked at the files for my business, the challenges we were facing. Before, they had felt like burdens, proof of my father's failures. Now they felt like opportunities. This was my life. This was my legacy. And I was going to build it. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself and to my son that I was worthy, not of their approval, but of my own. My journey of making them pay had just begun, not with revenge, but with a quiet, determined act of self-love. Waking up the next morning, I was hit by a peculiar sense of calm. The air outside was cold, but the sun streamed through my bedroom window, a promise of a new day. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the usual Sunday morning dread wasn't there. There were no looming phone calls from my mother, no passive-aggressive text messages to ignore, just silence. And it was a beautiful, liberating silence. I got up, made coffee, and went through my morning routine with a new sense of purpose. When Leo came downstairs, he was his usual cheerful self, a stark contrast to the somber boy from the night before. I made pancakes and we ate them together at the kitchen table, talking about his school week and the new video game he was playing. The conversation was easy, natural, and free from the phantom weight of my parents' judgment. After breakfast, I went to my home office. I had a lot on my mind. For years I had run my business, a software development firm, with a nagging feeling of inadequacy. Every success felt hollow, a temporary reprieve from my parents' disappointment. But yesterday's events had changed everything. The challenges we were facing, new market regulations that required significant software updates, no longer felt like a sign of my failure. They felt like a problem to be solved. And I was a problem solver. I spent the morning meticulously reviewing our project plans. I identified bottlenecks, streamlined communication protocols, and devised a new strategy for our marketing. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about proving anything to my father. This was about building something I was proud of for me, for my employees, and for my son. Around noon, my phone rang. The screen flashed my mother's name. A small wave of anxiety washed over me, a leftover habit from a lifetime of conditioning. But I took a deep breath, looked at the phone, and let it go to voicemail. Then I blocked her number. I did the same for my father's. It was a simple action, but it felt monumental, like cutting a cord that had tied me to a toxic past. I had a brief moment of doubt, a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a feeling of immense relief. Later that afternoon, I called my business partner, Lisa. She had been with me since the beginning, a brilliant developer who was just as frustrated with the industry's bureaucracy as I was. "Hey, David," she said, her voice laced with the usual hint of stress. "I was just about to call you. The timeline for the new API integration is looking tight. We might need to hire a few more junior devs." "Don't worry about it," I said, a newfound confidence in my voice. "I've been going over everything this morning. I think we can streamline the process. Let's schedule a meeting for tomorrow, just you, me, and the project leads. I have a new plan I want to go over. We're going to get ahead of this, not just react to it." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. "Okay, yeah, sounds good. You sound different." "I am," I said, a genuine smile forming on my face. "I've got a lot more on the line now." My focus shifted from my business to my son. I went into his room where he was happily absorbed in a book. "Hey, bud," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Want to go do something? Just the two of us?" His eyes lit up. "Like what? How about we go to the museum? I hear they have a new exhibit on old computers, the kind that looked like giant boxes." He laughed. "Like in the movies?" "Exactly," I said. "And after, we can get ice cream, even though it's freezing outside." The Boston Museum of Science was a place I had visited countless times as a child with my parents, but the trips had always felt like obligations, lessons in history and intellect rather than fun. This time it was different. We walked through the exhibits, not with a sense of duty but with genuine curiosity. I pointed out the bulky old mainframes, explaining how the technology had evolved. Leo, in turn, showed me his favorite dinosaur exhibit. We were just two people, sharing a moment, creating a new memory. As we stood in front of a massive model of a space shuttle, I felt a familiar pang of nostalgia. I remembered my father standing right there, lecturing me on the physics of lift and thrust, his voice devoid of warmth. I had always felt so small, so insignificant, next to his vast knowledge and experience. But today, standing with my son, I didn't feel small. I felt big. I felt like a guide, a protector, someone who could share knowledge and wonder without judgment. On the way home, Leo, his face smeared with mint chip ice cream, looked up at me. "Dad? Yeah, bud? Can we do this again?" "Every week," I promised, my heart swelling with a happiness so profound it almost hurt. That night, after putting Leo to bed, I sat in my living room, the city lights replaced by the soft glow of a table lamp. The silence was still there, the beautiful, liberating silence of a life lived on my own terms. My phone, which had buzzed with my mother's name earlier, was now dark. So I thought about the conversation with Lisa, the business plan I had started, the laughter I had shared with Leo at the museum. It was a new kind of currency, one that was not measured in dollars or social status, but in personal fulfillment and love. I had been running away from my parents' judgment for so long that I hadn't realized I was also running away from my own potential. Now, with the cord cut, I was finally free. The first steps were taken, and I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. My parents' attempts to re-enter my life would come, and they would be relentless. But for the first time I felt ready to face them, not as a wounded boy seeking approval, but as a man who had finally found his own worth. The feeling was intoxicating. I was making them pay, not with a grand gesture, but with the quiet, powerful act of building a life they would never be a part of. The first week after my self-imposed exile was a strange mix of exhilaration and anxiety. The silence from my parents was a phantom ache, a void where their constant low-level criticism used to be. It was like living in a house after a long-standing, annoying hum has been turned off. You're grateful, but you still wait for it to come back. My resolve was tested early Monday morning. My phone, which was no longer receiving calls from my parents, buzzed with an email notification. The sender was my mother. The subject line was simply, "Family." I stared at the screen, a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to delete it unread, to pretend it didn't exist. But a morbid curiosity, an old habit I was trying to break, got the better of me. I opened it. The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It started with a plea for reconciliation, framed as a concern for Leo. "We're so worried about our grandson," it read. "He must be so confused by your dramatic behavior. We just want to make sure he knows he can always come to us for love and stability, despite your challenges." She then went on to list a number of family obligations I was missing: a charity gala, a golf tournament, a dinner with one of my father's business associates, Mr. Harrison. Then she dropped the real hook. "Your father is so concerned about your recent business troubles. He was just telling us about this new development project at the old wharf, a huge contract. He's working on it with the city now. He's in a different league entirely, of course, but it's a good reminder of what real success looks like. We just want you to be happy, David, and we're not sure you are." I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. She wasn't just trying to lure me back. She was reminding me of my inferiority. She was dangling my father's success, a constant point of comparison as a way to prove my smallness. The mention of the wharf project was no accident. It was a subtle way of saying, "Your small problems are nothing compared to our grand achievements." I took a deep breath, fighting the old impulse to craft a defensive, angry reply. I closed the email and locked my phone. I wouldn't engage. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a response, of a reaction. This was the first test, and I wasn't going to fail. Later that day I had lunch with Mark. We met at a small cafe near my office. The air was colder, and a dusting of snow had begun to fall. "How are you holding up?" Mark asked, stirring his coffee. I told him about the email. He listened intently, his expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. "She's a piece of work, isn't she?" he said, shaking his head. "That's their playbook, David. They pull you in with guilt. Then they hit you with the reminder that you're not good enough, and she used Leo. That's low even for her." "I know," I said, a sense of quiet triumph settling over me, but I didn't respond. I just deleted the email. It felt good, like a weight off my shoulders. Mark smiled. "That's huge, man. That's a bigger victory than any business deal your father could ever land. It's an act of self-preservation. You're building a new foundation for your life, and you can't do that on their toxic soil." His words resonated. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My company was still facing challenges, but I had a clear vision. The team was motivated by our new proactive strategy. We were a tight-knit group, and our success or failure was on our own terms, not dictated by my parents' approval. That evening, I decided to do something that had always been a source of simple joy for me, but one I had often sacrificed for my parents' obligations. I bought 2 tickets to a Red Sox game at Fenway Park. The season was over, but they were hosting an open practice for a charity event. I hadn't been to a game with Leo in over a year. The air was frigid, the stands were half empty, but the atmosphere was electric. The roar of the small crowd, the smell of hot dogs and roasted peanuts, the sight of the green monster against the darkening sky. It was all pure, unadulterated Americana. Leo was in his element, shouting advice to the players, his face lit up with excitement. We shared a massive bag of popcorn, our hands brushing against each other as we reached for the greasy, salty treat. "This is so much better than dinner at Grandma and Grandpa's," Leo said, his voice bright and clear. My heart swelled. "It is, isn't it?" I said, smiling. "This is what's important, bud. Not big houses or fancy cars, just this, being together." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the field. He didn't understand the full scope of what had happened, but he understood the feeling of freedom, of peace, of simply being with the person he loved without judgment. He was living proof that I was making the right choice. As we walked back to the car, the cold wind whipping around us, I thought about my mother's email. I thought about the subtle barbs, the attempts to pull me back into their web of control. But as I looked at my son's joyful face, the sting of her words faded into nothing. I had passed the first test, and I knew there would be more. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The road to making them pay was not about a single act of revenge. It was about the continuous daily act of choosing my own happiness. And that, I was beginning to realize, was the most powerful revenge of all. The following weeks were a whirlwind of focused work and quiet satisfaction. The new strategy at my company was paying off. We had a renewed sense of purpose, and the team was working together with a synergy I hadn't seen in years. The market challenges were still present, but we were meeting them head-on. The constant hum of my parents' presence in my life had been replaced by the quiet hum of productivity and the joyful noise of my son's laughter. Then, the unexpected happened. We were in a high-stakes competition for a major contract. The client, a large e-commerce company, was looking to overhaul their entire logistics software system. It was a massive project, one that could secure the financial future of my company for years. We were one of 3 finalists. The other 2 were corporate giants, well known in the industry. One of them, I learned from a quick search, was a subsidiary of my father's massive real estate and investment firm. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was directly competing against a part of my father's empire. A few days later, a strange email arrived. It was from a man named Mr. Harrison. I recognized the name from my mother's email. He was a prominent architect and a long-time associate of my father's. The subject line was professional, a simple regarding the e-commerce project. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was another one of my parents' ploys, but the email was short and to the point. Mr. Harrison was semi-retired and had consulted on the e-commerce company's new headquarters. He was a close friend of their CEO. He had heard about the project and my company's involvement and wanted to meet for coffee. It was a long shot, but I decided to go. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Mr. Harrison was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with a warm smile and a calm, reassuring presence that was a stark contrast to my father's abrasive demeanor. "David," he said, shaking my hand, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you properly. I've known your father for years." We made small talk about the city, the weather, and his retirement. Then he got to the point. "I have to be honest with you," he said, leaning forward. "Your father and I have a long history. I was present at many of his business dinners and social gatherings. I've heard him talk about you." My heart sank. I braced myself for the worst, for another list of my supposed failings, a recitation of all the times my father had publicly belittled me. "He used to tell stories about you," Mr. Harrison continued, "about how you chose your own path, how you decided to start a small software firm instead of joining his real estate empire. He would frame it as a disappointment, a failure. He would say, 'You lacked ambition.'" I nodded, the words a familiar echo of a lifetime of criticism. He's never been one to mince words. "But I always saw it differently," Mr. Harrison said, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've seen Robert in his element. He's a shark. He gets what he wants, but he leaves a trail of people behind. He was always worried you weren't tough enough to survive in his world. But there was something else, a flicker of pride." I almost laughed. "Pride? My father?" "Yes," he said, his voice earnest. "He would criticize you, but he would also talk about your company. He'd mention your latest contracts, your innovative projects. He'd complain that you weren't cut out for his world, but he'd also describe your world with a kind of grudging respect. I think he saw your courage. He saw you building something from the ground up, just like he did, but without the cutthroat mentality that made him so miserable." A new picture of my father began to form in my mind, one I had never considered. He wasn't just a man who wanted to control me. He was a man who saw my path as a threat to his own carefully constructed narrative of success. He couldn't understand my choices, so he condemned them. But somewhere, deep down, he recognized the courage it took to make them. "So, why are you telling me this?" I asked, a sense of cautious hope rising within me. "Because the company you're up against, the subsidiary of your father's firm, they're playing dirty. I've heard they're using a lot of the same tactics your father uses in his business deals. Subtle coercion, under-the-table offers. It's not ethical. And frankly, your firm is the better fit for the job, technologically and culturally. The CEO of the e-commerce company wants a partner, not a takeover artist. And from what I've seen of your company, you're a genuine partner. You're not a shark. You're building something real." He took a sip of his coffee. "I'm not going to tell the CEO to pick you. That's not how I operate. But I've told him to look past the brand names and the slick presentations. I've told him to look for a company with integrity, and I have a feeling that's yours." I was stunned. I had walked into this meeting expecting to be belittled, to be reminded of my inferiority. Instead, I had found an unexpected ally, a man who had seen through the facade of my father's cruelty and recognized a deeper, more complicated truth. As I left the cafe, the cold wind seemed less biting. The world hadn't changed, but my perception of it had. My father's constant criticism, which had once felt like a personal failing, now felt like a defense mechanism. He wasn't just disappointed in me. He was envious of my freedom, of the fact that I had chosen a different path, a path that was not burdened by the ruthless pursuit of power. I returned to my office with a renewed sense of purpose. The competition was still fierce, but I knew that I had something they didn't: integrity. I wasn't a corporate shark. I was a man who had built a company on his own terms. My father's empire was built on conquest. Mine was built on collaboration. The contrast was stark, and I knew which one I would rather stand for. I called Lisa. "Let's work through the weekend if we have to," I said. "We have to be ready to show them who we are, not just what we do." The test of my resolve was not over, but this time it was more than just about standing up to my parents. It was about defining my own legacy, and for the first time I felt like I was winning. The following days were a marathon of long hours and intense work. My team and I were in the trenches, refining our pitch for the e-commerce project. I felt a sense of camaraderie I hadn't experienced before. We were a small army, unified by a single purpose. The thought of my father's corporate machine, with its layers of bureaucracy and impersonal culture, only fueled my determination. We were a team of people who cared, not just about the project, but about each other. The intensity of the work was balanced by the simple joys of home. I made a point of leaving the office in time to have dinner with Leo every night. The long days were worth it for those few hours of normalcy, of a shared meal and a recap of our day. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found Leo in his room meticulously arranging a small collection of toy cars. "What are you doing, bud?" I asked, sitting on the floor beside him. "I'm building a city," he said, a look of intense concentration on his face. "But the roads are all messy, and the buildings keep falling down." An idea sparked in my mind. I had a model train set in the attic, a forgotten relic of my own childhood. My father had bought it for me, but he had never helped me build it. He had simply set the box down and said, "You have to build it yourself, son. That's how you learn to be a man." I had tried, but the instructions were too complicated, the pieces too small. I had given up, and the train set had been relegated to the attic, another symbol of my failure. "Hey," I said, "how about we build something together? Something with tracks and buildings that don't fall down." Leo's eyes widened. "A train set?" "Exactly," I said. "It's up in the attic. We can start a new project." We spent the next few hours rummaging through dusty boxes in the attic. We found the train set, a beautiful old model with a sleek locomotive and an assortment of tiny houses and trees. We brought it down, blew the dust off, and spread the pieces across the living room floor. It was a mess of wires, tracks, and plastic parts, but to us, it was a canvas. Over the next few nights, the train set became our ritual. We would work on it together after dinner, slowly piecing together the tracks, gluing the tiny trees to the landscape, and connecting the wires. It was a project that required patience and teamwork, and every small victory felt monumental. It was a metaphor for my life. I was building something new from the ground up, and this time, I wasn't doing it alone. My relationship with Sarah, my ex-wife, also began to shift. We had always been civil, but the events of the past few weeks had brought us closer. I invited her over for coffee one afternoon while Leo was at a friend's house. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "I'm sorry for everything that happened with my parents. It was a mess, and I should have stood up to them years ago, for Leo's sake and for yours." Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "David, you were a victim of their emotional abuse just like I was. You were just a part of their system, but you're not anymore. You're a different person now, I see it." "I am," I said, "and I want to make sure we're on the same page. I want to be a better co-parent, a better partner in raising him. He needs us both now more than ever. We talked for hours, not as a divorced couple, but as two parents who shared a common goal, to give our son a childhood free from the kind of toxicity that had poisoned my own. We made a pact to always put Leo first, to communicate openly, and to present a united front. My professional life was also beginning to thrive. The stress of the upcoming pitch was a healthy kind of stress, the kind that comes from a challenge you're excited to meet. I knew our presentation was good, but I wanted to make it great. I decided to seek out an outside perspective. I found a business consultant, a woman named Maria, who had a reputation for her straightforward, no-nonsense approach. Maria was a sharp, insightful woman in her early 50s. I gave her our presentation and our business plan. She listened patiently as I explained our company's ethos, our approach, and our new strategy. When I finished, she didn't mince words. "Your business plan is good," she said, her voice clear and direct. "But your story is even better. This isn't just about a software solution. It's about a company with a soul. You need to stop trying to be a corporate giant and start selling your values. Tell them who you are, not just what you do. Tell them you're a partner, not a competitor. Tell them you're a company that cares about its people. That's a story that your father's company, for all their money, can never tell." Her words were a final piece of the puzzle. I had been so focused on proving my professional competence that I had forgotten to showcase the one thing that made my company truly unique: our humanity. I revised the presentation, infusing it with our story, our values, our passion. I put in a slide about our team, highlighting the individual contributions and the collaborative spirit. The night before the presentation, I sat in my office, the revised presentation on the screen. The model train set in my living room was almost complete, a tiny, perfect world of tracks and houses. I thought about the bridges I had built, with my son, with my ex-wife, with my team. I wasn't a failure. I was a builder, and for the first time in my life I was building a world that was entirely my own. The day of the big presentation arrived with a fierce winter storm. The city was blanketed in snow, and the streets were a mess, but nothing could deter me. I was ready. My team and I arrived at the conference hall, our laptops and folders clutched tightly in our hands. The air inside was warm, but the tension was palpable. The other two finalists, including the subsidiary of my father's firm, were already there. As we set up, I saw him. My father, Robert, stood in a corner, talking with the CEO of the e-commerce company. He was impeccably dressed, his posture as straight and unyielding as ever. My mother, Eleanor, was by his side, her smile a thin line. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I hadn't expected them to be here. My heart pounded against my ribs, a familiar beat of fear and dread. My father looked up and our eyes met across the crowded room. His expression was unreadable, but my mother's was a mix of triumph and contempt. I knew what she was thinking. She was here to see me fail, to see her trash son get what he deserved. The presentations began. The first company was all corporate jargon and meaningless buzzwords. They were big, but they were soulless. The second company, my father's subsidiary, was polished, slick, and full of empty promises. Their presenter was a young, arrogant man who seemed to embody the very essence of my father's ruthless business model. He spoke about market dominance and conquest. He spoke about taking over the industry. He was a shark. Then it was our turn. I took the stage, the warmth of the spotlight a stark contrast to the cold stare of my parents. I didn't start with numbers or jargon. I started with a story. I talked about how my company started with a simple idea: to create software that made people's lives easier, not more complicated. I talked about our values, our commitment to our people, and our collaborative approach. I didn't hide our challenges. I framed them as opportunities for growth. I ended the presentation not with a promise of market dominance, but with a promise of partnership. As I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then a wave of applause broke out. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a genuine, enthusiastic reaction. The CEO of the e-commerce company, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression, nodded in my direction. I felt a surge of pride so powerful, it almost brought tears to my eyes. As I was leaving the stage, my father intercepted me. He didn't look angry. He looked different, tired. "That was quite the speech, David," he said, his voice low. "It was just the truth, Dad," I replied. my voice steady. "The truth. You're a man who runs from his problems and you're telling people you're a leader." He scoffed, the old contempt creeping back into his voice. "I'm not running from my problems, Dad," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm facing them. I'm facing a business challenge and I'm facing you, and I'm not running from either one." My mother walked over, her face a mask of disappointment. "Don't bother, Robert. He'll never understand." "He doesn't have to," I said, a new kind of confidence in my voice. "I understand. I understand that I spent a lifetime trying to be the man you wanted me to be, and I failed. But I'm okay with that, because I've learned to be the man I want to be, the man my son deserves." I looked at my mother. "I'm a better man now, and I'm not trash. I'm just me." I turned to walk away, but my father stopped me. His face was a strange mix of anger and something else, something I had never seen before, vulnerability. "Why are you doing this, David? Why are you trying to shame us in public?" "I'm not trying to shame you," I said. "I'm just trying to live. And to be honest, I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for myself, and for Leo." My father's eyes flickered, and for a moment, the mask of the stoic patriarch slipped. He glanced around the bustling conference hall, at the younger, more vibrant people who were shaping the future of the industry. He looked older, more fragile than I had ever seen him. "You know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "my father, he was even worse than me. He was a tyrant. He used to tell me I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything. He taught me that the only way to succeed was to crush everyone in your path. I've lived my whole life believing that. I never knew how to be anything else." The words hit me like a revelation. The cycle of pain, the deep-seated trauma, it all made sense. My father's cruelty wasn't just about me. It was about him. It was a reflection of his own unresolved pain. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt a wave of profound sadness. My whole life I had been fighting a ghost. The monster under my bed wasn't just my father, it was his father and his father before him. I looked at him, no longer with anger but with a strange, quiet pity. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, and I meant it. He just stared at me, his eyes clouded with a lifetime of unexpressed emotion. My mother, still in her carefully constructed mask, pulled his arm. "Robert, come on, we're leaving." He didn't resist. He let her lead him away, a defeated figure in the midst of a victory he could never have conceived of. I watched them go, a chapter of my life closing before my eyes. My confrontation with them hadn't been about winning an argument. It had been about a final, quiet act of emotional independence. I had stood my ground, not as a defiant son, but as a man who had finally found his voice. And in doing so, I had not only broken free, I had finally begun to understand the very people who had held me captive for so long. The days following the conference were a blur of nervous anticipation. The e-commerce company's CEO had been thoughtful and engaged during our presentation, but so had the representatives from the other firms. We had done our best, and now all we could do was wait. I kept myself busy, focusing on the model train set with Leo, spending time with Sarah and getting ahead on our other projects. Then the call came. It was the CEO of the e-commerce company. My heart hammered against my ribs as I answered. "David," he said, his voice warm and professional, "I've thought a lot about your presentation. Your team's software solution is top-notch, exactly what we were looking for. But what really sealed the deal for us was the story you told, the one about your company, about your people. We want to work with a partner, a company that has a soul, and yours does." A wave of relief and pure, unadulterated joy washed over me. I couldn't believe it. We had won. "Thank you so much," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This means so much to us." He laughed. "It means you have a lot of work ahead of you. Welcome to the team." I hung up the phone and let out a whoop of triumph. The whole office erupted in cheers. We had done it. We had landed the biggest contract in our company's history. It wasn't just a business deal, it was a vindication. It was proof that my way of doing things, the human way, the right way, was not a weakness. It was a strength. That night, my team and I went out to celebrate. The city was a winter wonderland, the snow still glistening on the streets. We raised our glasses not just to the new contract, but to each other. We were a family, a group of people who had built something extraordinary together. The next morning, the news was everywhere. A small independent software firm had won a massive contract, beating out two corporate giants. The headlines were a celebration of the underdog. The local news channel ran a story on us, and I was asked to give an interview. I sat in my living room, my phone propped up on a stack of books, and answered the reporter's questions. I talked about our team, our values, our commitment to our clients. I spoke with a confidence and pride I hadn't known I possessed. Later that evening, after the news report aired, Leo came into the living room, a shy smile on his face. "Dad?" he said, clutching a remote control in his hand. "I saw you on the TV. They said you were a hero." The words were so simple, so pure, and yet they meant more to me than any headline, any contract, or any dollar amount. I pulled him into a hug, my arms wrapped tightly around his small frame. "I'm not a hero, buddy," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm just a dad who loves his son." He pulled back, his eyes shining. "You're the best dad in the whole world," he said, "and you're not trash." In that moment, I knew I had made them pay. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the quiet, undeniable proof of my success. The victory wasn't the contract. The victory was in my son's eyes, in his belief in me. It was in the fact that I had created a life, a business, and a family that were built on the values I held dear, not the values my parents had tried to force on me. I decided right then and there to use a portion of the new contract money to start a community fund. It would be a fund for local small businesses, to help them with software and technology. It was an idea that had been brewing in my mind for a while, a way to give back to the community that had supported me. It was a project that my father would never understand. His success was built on taking from others. Mine would be built on giving back. As I sat there looking at my son's bright, loving face, I felt a lightness I had never known. The backpack of my parents' expectations, the one I had carried for so long, was gone. It had been replaced by a different kind of weight, the weight of my own self-respect. And for the first time, it didn't feel heavy at all. It felt like a solid, unshakable foundation. The most profound kind of success was not measured in a balance sheet, but in the love and respect of the people who mattered most. And I had that in abundance. Months passed. My company was thriving. The new project was well underway, and my team was more motivated than ever. My relationship with Leo was stronger than ever. We had finished the model train set, a tiny, perfect world that sat on a table in the living room, a constant reminder of our shared journey. My co-parenting relationship with Sarah had blossomed into a genuine friendship, a respectful, supportive partnership. The phone calls from my parents had stopped. The passive-aggressive emails had ceased. But I knew the silence couldn't last forever. It was too unnatural. A few weeks ago, I had received a letter from my father's assistant, a formal request for a meeting. It was brief and to the point. My father wanted to talk, alone. I hesitated, but a strange sense of closure, of finality, told me to go. I had nothing to lose. I wasn't the same man who had walked out of their penthouse all those months ago. We agreed to meet at a public park, a quiet, neutral space far from their world of penthouses and boardrooms. The day was crisp and clear, the air smelling of fresh spring rain. I arrived first, standing near a small pond, watching the ducks. I felt a sense of calm I wouldn't have thought possible a year ago. My parents arrived together, walking side by side. My father looked older, his shoulders slightly stooped. My mother, for the first time in my life, wasn't smiling her perfectly manicured smile. Her face was a portrait of guarded concern. "David," my father said, his voice gruff but without the usual bite. "Thank you for meeting with us." "It's just me, Dad," I said, gesturing to the open space. "The letter said you wanted to talk to me alone." My mother's expression tightened. "We're here as a family." "No," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "We're not. Not in the way you think. Not anymore. I'll talk to you both, but I won't pretend things are the way they used to be." My father sighed, a long, weary sound. "Eleanor, could you just give us a moment?" My mother's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, but she walked away, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She stood a few dozen yards away, her back to us, a statue of silent protest. My father and I walked to a nearby bench and sat down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, two men with a lifetime of history between us, finally facing each other without the armor of expectation and resentment. "I saw the news," my father finally said, "about your company and the new contract. We worked hard for it," I said simply. "Yes," he said, and I almost flinched, waiting for the criticism, but it never came. "You did. It was a different kind of deal, not one of conquest, but of collaboration. I don't understand it, but I respect it. I looked at him, surprised. "Thank you, Dad. I wanted to apologize," he said, the words coming out with a stilted awkwardness, as if they were alien to his tongue. "For what I said, for what your mother said, for the dinner, for everything." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw not the powerful titan of industry, but the frightened boy he had once been, the one who had been taught that the only way to survive was to be cold and ruthless. "I don't know how to be a father, David," he said, his voice a low, pained rumble. "I only know how to be a boss. It's the only language I was ever taught." The admission was a final piece of the puzzle, a sad, honest truth that broke through the years of silence and cruelty. I felt a sense of profound pity, but also of relief. I wasn't just a failure to him. I was an enigma, a challenge to his entire worldview. "I understand," I said, and I did. "But you hurt me, Dad, and you hurt Leo. You can't just apologize and pretend it never happened. I won't be that man anymore. I won't go back to the way things were." He looked down at his hands, his head bowed. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to." I looked at my mother, standing alone, her rigid posture a testament to a lifetime of pride. I knew she was watching us. "I'm not going to cut you out of my life completely," I said. "But our relationship, it has to be different. It has to be on my terms. It has to be based on mutual respect, not on your expectations. We can see each other, we can have dinner. But if you ever say something like that again, if you ever try to belittle me or Leo, I will walk away and I won't come back. You have to understand that. This is my boundary." He looked up, a hint of the old steely resolve in his eyes. "You're a lot like me, you know," he said. "You're stubborn. You're a fighter. You just use your strength differently." I smiled. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I learned from the best, but I learned what not to do." My father nodded slowly, a small, sad smile on his face. The meeting was over. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We just stood there for a moment, two men who had finally come to an understanding, a truce in a war that had lasted a lifetime. I walked over to my mother. "Eleanor," I said. He apologized. He explained why he did what he did. "It's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. But I need you to know, I love you. But I can't be in your life if you can't treat me with respect, if you can't be proud of the man I am, not the man you wanted me to be." Her eyes, for a split second, flickered with something I hadn't seen before, genuine pain. But then the mask returned, a wall of perfectly constructed elegance. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was the answer. I walked away, leaving them standing there, two statues in a public park, frozen in a world they had so carefully constructed. The walk back to my car was the longest and shortest of my life. The air was cool, the sun was warm, and the world was full of possibility. I had made them pay. I had made them see me, not as a failure, but as a man who had finally found his own worth. And that, I realized, was a victory far greater than any I could have ever imagined. Life, as it often does, moved on. The massive e-commerce contract was now a daily reality, a testament to my team's hard work and our new proactive approach. My company was not just surviving, it was thriving. We were hiring new people, taking on new challenges, and building a reputation for integrity and innovation. The small community fund I had started was already making a difference, providing grants to local entrepreneurs and small businesses, people who had a vision but lacked the resources to bring it to life. My relationship with Leo was the cornerstone of my world. We had finished the model train set, and it now sat on a table in the living room, a perfect miniature world we had built together. We spent our weekends at the park, at museums, or just at home, our days filled with the simple, easy joy of being together. He was growing into a kind, confident, and curious young man, a boy who knew that his father's worth was not measured by a bank account, but by his love for his family and his commitment to his values. My parents remained a quiet presence on the periphery of my life. They would send me a letter from time to time, and I would respond with a brief, polite email. We saw them on holidays, but the visits were short and carefully managed. There were no longer any harsh words, no veiled insults, just a polite, slightly awkward distance. They would try to talk about business, but I would quickly change the subject to something innocuous, like the weather or Leo's school. I had set a boundary, And for the first time, they respected it. One evening, several months after our meeting at the park, a local news channel was running a special on the community fund my company had started. They had filmed a small ceremony where we were giving out our first round of grants. The camera panned over to me, my face a mix of pride and humility as I talked about the importance of supporting local businesses. I explained that it wasn't just about a financial investment, it was about a belief in people, in their dreams, and in their ability to change their own lives. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text message, not from my mother or father, but from my father's assistant. It was a simple message, just 2 words. He saw it. There was no need for further explanation. I knew he had seen the news report. He had seen me, his trash son, not just succeeding, but succeeding on my own terms, with my own values, and with a different kind of purpose. He saw me giving back to a community he had only ever taken from. He saw me building a legacy of kindness, not of conquest. He saw me paying. I didn't respond to the text. There was nothing more to say. The payment wasn't in an argument or a confrontation. It was in the quiet, undeniable proof of my life. It was in the fact that I was happy, that my son was happy, and that I was making a positive impact on the world. I was no longer a victim. I was a victor. The next day, as I was packing Leo's lunch, he asked me about the model train set. "Dad," he said, "do you think we could build a bigger one? One that has more tracks and maybe a station and a little town?" I smiled, a wide, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I think so, buddy," I said. "I think we can build anything we want." The weight was gone. The backpack of my parents' expectations, the ghost of their disapproval, it was all a distant memory. The only weight I carried now was the light, profound weight of my own purpose. I was a builder of companies, of communities, of families, and of my own destiny. My parents had called me trash, but I had become a creator. And that was the greatest victory of all.